I'm Caleb, 24 years old, and for as long as I can remember, my dad believed respect was earned only through control. Not kindness, not understanding, just dominance. He was the kind of guy who said things like, my roof, my rules, and meant it down to the letter. I lived with him and my younger brother Nathan in a weathered two-story house in northern Michigan. Mom passed away when I was 17, and ever since, Dad had taken her absence as permission to crank up the authority. He wasn't physically abusive, but his words hit hard enough to bruise. You could never win with him. If I got an A, he'd ask why it wasn't an A+. If I got promoted at work, he'd say it was because my boss probably felt sorry for me. He wasn't always like that when Mom was around. But after she died, something in him calcified, like all his warmth died with her. For the past few years, I'd been working part-time at an IT firm while finishing my degree in cybersecurity. I paid rent, I helped with groceries, and I even handled the Wi-Fi and electric bills because Dad never bothered. I had access to the accounts, knew the logins, and set everything to autopay from my bank. It made things easier, and at the time, I thought I was just doing what needed to be done for the family. But to Dad, it didn't matter. If something went wrong, I was the first punching bag in line. If the sink leaked, it was my fault for not fixing it. If Nathan was acting out in school, it was because I was being a bad example. No matter how much I did, I was always the disappointment. Things came to a head one Tuesday night, about a month after I graduated. I had just come home from a long shift. Our servers had been down, and I'd stayed an extra 3 hours trying to patch the system. I walked in, exhausted, still in my work polo, and found Dad watching TV while the sink overflowed in the kitchen. Nathan was in his room blasting music, the dog hadn't been walked, and the trash was piled up to knee height. I sighed, dropped my bag, and went to clean the mess. That's when Dad snapped. "Don't you come in here acting all high and mighty," he barked. "You think because you got some little paper from college you're better than the rest of us?" I didn't say that. I replied, wiping up the water on the floor. "But this house is a mess, and no one else is doing anything." He stood up so fast the recliner nearly tipped. "You ungrateful brat. You're lucky I even let you live here. If you're so smart, then pay your own bills and live somewhere else." I stood still, soaked rag in my hand. The words hung in the air like frost. For the first time, I didn't flinch. I just nodded. "All right," I said quietly. "You got it." That night, I packed my things. Not everything, just the essentials: laptop, clothes, some childhood photos of Mom that I didn't trust to leave behind. I booked a cheap extended stay motel for a few days and called a coworker who had mentioned a spare room in her cousin's place. Within the week, I had my own space. Tiny, yes, but peaceful. I paid rent directly, bought my own groceries, and for the first time in years, I could breathe without walking on eggshells. I didn't hear from Dad after I left. Not once. He didn't call to ask where I went, didn't text to check if I was alive. Nathan reached out once, vaguely, just asking if I had any spare money for a new Xbox controller. I told him no, and that was that. I figured they'd moved on. I wasn't part of the picture anymore. Then, for weeks later, I got a call while I was at work. I recognized the number. It was the landline back home. For a moment, my stomach twisted. I thought something had happened to Nathan. I picked up. "Hello. Caleb," Dad said, voice sharp and urgent. "What did you do?" I blinked. "Excuse me. The power's off. The internet's down. Everything's out. What is going on?" I sat back in my chair, stunned for a second before it clicked. The electric bill, the Wi-Fi, the auto payments. They were all still in my name, and I had pulled my bank account from them the day I left. I hadn't thought much of it. I assumed Dad would take over, or at least notice when the bills didn't go through. "I'm not paying for your house anymore," I said evenly. "You told me to pay my own bills and live somewhere else." So I did. There was silence on the other end. A beat, maybe two, and then, "You seriously left us in the dark?" I smiled, not out of pettiness, but from relief. "You seriously thought I'd keep paying your bills after you told me to get out?" "You little," he caught himself. "You know Nathan's in school. He needs the internet. And what about the fridge, the heating?" I cut him off. "You're the parent, remember? Figure it out." He hung up on me. I didn't hear from him again for 3 days. Then a text popped up from Nathan. "Thanks a lot. I had to do my homework at McDonald's." I didn't reply. What happened after that started to ripple further than I expected. That's where the real fallout began. Not just lights going off, but something much bigger unraveling. And it all started when Dad tried to reconnect the power, only to find out the account wasn't just under my name. It was under something much more permanent. The thing is, when I had first set up those utilities years ago, Dad hadn't wanted to deal with that kind of nonsense. I was 18 and had just started working part-time, and when I told him the internet was getting shut off due to unpaid bills, he tossed me his credit card and told me to figure it out. So I did. I made the calls, paid the fees, and set up new accounts under my name. Same for the electricity a few months later when we got a notice taped to the front door. Every time something went wrong, I'd quietly fix it, thinking I was just being responsible. Over the years, the account stayed in my name, and Dad never once asked or cared. Why would he? The lights stayed on. The Wi-Fi worked. He had power, control, and convenience, all without lifting a finger. But now, the power company wouldn't talk to him. Neither would the internet provider. They kept telling him, "Sorry, sir, we can't discuss this account unless we speak to the account holder." And that account holder was me. 3 days after the initial call, I got a second one, this time from a blocked number. I knew it was him, so I didn't answer. But the voicemail he left, I listened to it 3 times. His voice was strained, angry, but there was an undercurrent of something else. Desperation. "Caleb," he said, "I don't know what point you're trying to make, but your brother's got finals this week. And I got food spoiling in the fridge. Just call me back. We need to talk." I didn't call back. Instead, I texted him one line, "Pay your own bills. You said it yourself." That was the first time I'd ever used his own words against him. And it felt strange. Not good. Not bad. Just strange. Because I wasn't trying to get revenge. Not yet, anyway. I just didn't want to be used anymore. But part of me couldn't help thinking about all the nights I sat at that kitchen table, quietly transferring my own money to keep the house running while he barked insults from the other room. The time he tossed a plate across the room because I used his eggs to make breakfast. The week he grounded me at 21 for disrespect because I told him I had a job interview in another state. But I wasn't grounded anymore. I was out. Later that week, I got a text from Nathan. Just a picture. A dark living room lit by candles, a space heater on the floor, and our dog curled up in a blanket. Under it, he wrote, "You win." That stung more than I expected. I didn't reply, but I stared at that image for a long time. I felt guilty, not for leaving, but for dragging my little brother into the fallout. He wasn't a saint. He ignored most chores and treated me like an overqualified butler, but he was still a kid. 17, nearly 18, but still. He didn't deserve the cold or the chaos. That night, I sent him a $50 Visa e-gift card with a message, "Get some hot food. This isn't about you." The next day, I got an email from the power company. Request for account change denied. Proof of ownership required. Apparently, Dad had tried to get the account switched over and failed. The address was tied to my account, and since I'd set it up years ago with a lease agreement, technically forged since Dad never wrote one, they needed documentation that he was the property owner. But the thing is, he wasn't. I was. See, what Dad never knew, what Mom had quietly arranged before her passing, was that the house had been willed jointly to both of us, me and Nathan. When she died, the paperwork got stalled in probate, and Dad brushed it off, saying it didn't matter because it's all ours anyway. But 2 years ago, I finally followed through with the legal process. I paid the lawyer fees, filed the claim, and received official notice that the property was now under my and Nathan's names. Mom's final act of quiet rebellion. I didn't tell Dad. I didn't need to. I had no plans to use it against him until he forced me out. And now? Well, now the utilities weren't the only thing under my control. A week after the lights went out, Dad showed up at my new place. Not screaming, not shouting, just standing at the edge of the driveway in his faded leather jacket, shoulders hunched, as if gravity had finally caught up to him. I didn't open the door. I just watched through the blinds. He stayed there for 10 minutes, then turned around and walked away. That night, I got another call. This time, he didn't yell. "I was wrong, Caleb," he said. "You're not a burden. You're not useless. You kept this family together longer than I ever realized." He paused, like he was waiting for me to jump in. I didn't. "I need your help," he continued. "Just for a little while. I'll pay you back. I swear. I didn't know the house was in your name. I didn't know you could do that." That's when it hit me. He didn't call to apologize. He called because he realized I held the reins. I didn't respond that night, but I started thinking. If he wanted power back on, if he wanted access, then maybe it was time to teach him that control could be taken away just as easily as it was enforced. Not out of spite, but to restore balance, to remind him that respect wasn't something you demanded. It was something you earned. And so, the real plan began. Because turning off the lights? That was just the beginning. After that phone call, I didn't speak to Dad for days. I was quiet, calculated. I didn't want to move emotionally. I wanted to move smart. I started combing through the documents Mom left behind. I already had the deed showing me and Nathan as co-owners, but there was more. Bank statements, life insurance policy copies, even an old letter she'd handwritten but never sent. A letter addressed to me. It wasn't dramatic or long. It just said, "I know your father, and I know one day he will test your strength. Be kind, but not weak." That one line stuck with me. I didn't want revenge in the way movies made it seem. Fireworks, dramatic speeches, door-slamming power moves. I wanted something quieter, something that would remind him who had been holding things together all along. I began by formally transferring all utility services to inactive status. I didn't cancel them. I simply requested each to be paused due to ownership dispute and tenant removal. That process sent a legal notice to the address, warning of possible repossession of service due to account disputes. Dad tried calling again, 5 times, left 2 voicemails. The last one was him, quieter this time, asking me to come by and talk face to face. I ignored it. Then the twist happened. Nathan showed up at my new place. It was late, around 9 p.m., and I'd just come back from work. I saw his silhouette through the window, his hoodie soaked from the rain. I opened the door, and he just stood there for a moment before blurting out, "He's trying to sell the house." I blinked. "What?" He said he called a realtor. He's planning to cash out and move to Florida. Said he's tired of the cold. Said he's earned it. The fury that rushed up through my chest nearly made me dizzy. I had to grip the doorframe to stay upright. "He can't sell it," I said. "He doesn't own it." "I know," Nathan replied. "But he doesn't care. He's going to try anyway." Said he can forge a signature and that nobody's going to double-check some small-town paperwork. That's when I knew Dad had crossed a line. It wasn't just pride or anger anymore. It was theft. He was planning to illegally sell a home that didn't fully belong to him and take every penny. No discussion. No care that Nathan, his own son, would be left homeless. And certainly no intent to repay anything he owed me. I thanked Nathan, gave him a towel and something hot to drink, and sat with him in silence. It was the first time in years we'd just talked. No tension, no background insults from Dad. Just 2 brothers, finally seeing things clearly. He apologized for how he used to act, how he'd ignored me, let Dad walk all over me, and called me uptight when I tried to keep things from falling apart. "You were the adult," he said, when the actual adult stopped being one. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up gathering every document, deed copies, utilities, proof of ownership, even screenshots of every bill I'd paid in the last 4 years. Then I wrote an email to our family lawyer, the same one who helped me with the deed transfer 2 years ago. The next morning, I dropped off a hard copy packet at his office. 2 days later, Dad got served. An official cease and desist order, barring him from attempting to sell, rent, or claim financial ownership of the property. It was hand-delivered to him in front of his house, where he was standing with a real estate agent on the porch. Nathan told me he looked like someone had punched the air out of him. But that wasn't the betrayal. That came a few days later, when I showed up unannounced at the house, holding the same folder, and found Dad sitting at the kitchen table in the dark, a single candle flickering beside an old mug. He looked up at me, eyes tired. "You came." I said nothing. I sat across from him and laid the documents out one by one. "This is the deed," I said, tapping the page. "You don't own the house." He swallowed. "This is your utility history. You haven't paid a dime in years." He opened his mouth, but I raised a hand to stop him. "This is proof of attempted fraud. You tried to sell a house you don't own, and I have the voicemail you left Nathan where you admitted it. So if I wanted to press charges." He sat perfectly still. I could. I let the words hang. Then I leaned back, watching him shrink under the weight of it. He didn't speak for a long time. Then, finally, "I didn't think you'd go this far." I smiled faintly. "Neither did I. But here we are." His voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. "What do you want from me, Caleb? Do you want me to say I'm sorry? That I was a terrible father?" "No," I said, standing. I want you to understand that the person you thought was weak was the one keeping your entire life from collapsing. And I left. But it wasn't over yet. Because 3 days later, I got a text from my uncle, the one who lived 2 towns over and who Dad had always bragged to about keeping the house in order. The text just said, "Call me. You're not going to believe what your dad told me." That's when I realized Dad had started spinning a new narrative. And I wasn't about to let that slide. I called my uncle that night. He picked up fast, like he'd been waiting. "Hey, Caleb," he said, voice cautious. "I didn't know what to believe at first, but after everything you've done for your dad over the years, I figured you deserved to know what he's been saying." I braced myself. "Go ahead." He told the family you hacked into his accounts, that you stole the house, that you froze the electricity out of spite because he refused to co-sign your car loan. I let out a quiet, disbelieving breath. He kept going. "He's already called Aunt Leslie and Grandpa Dale. Told them you've been unstable since your mom passed, that you're trying to punish the whole family because you never dealt with her death." The worst part? I wasn't even surprised. I thanked him and hung up, then sat in my car for a long while, staring at the steering wheel. My knuckles tightened around it. This wasn't just some exaggerated story to save face. This was character assassination. This was him reaching into the only place I hadn't touched yet, our extended family, and poisoning the well. And maybe, if I hadn't already spent years cleaning up his messes, I would have second-guessed myself. But I didn't. I knew the truth. And now, it was time to face it. I fell into a routine after that. Go to work. Keep quiet. Stay focused. But every night, something in me grew colder. Not bitter. Not even angry. Just resolved. I stopped expecting an apology. I stopped hoping he'd realize what he'd done. And slowly, I started to prepare for life without him in it at all. One night, about a week later, Nathan called. He sounded weirdly formal, which wasn't like him. "Hey," he said. "So, Dad's been telling people he kicked you out." I closed my eyes. "Yeah, I heard. He told my guidance counselor at school. Said you were ungrateful, that you took advantage of him, and then ghosted. Now everyone thinks he's some kind of saint raising me all on his own." I could hear the conflict in his voice, part disbelief, part shame, part boiling frustration. "Do you believe him?" I asked quietly. There was a pause. "No," he said. "Not anymore." And that meant more to me than anything. Not the deed. Not the house. Just hearing my little brother finally see through the mask. But things got worse before they got better. That weekend, I stopped by the house one last time, intending to grab a few boxes I'd left in the attic. Old yearbooks, photo albums, stuff that didn't matter to Dad, but meant the world to me. He was sitting outside on the porch, hunched over with a beer in one hand and a pack of unpaid bills in the other. When he saw me, he didn't say anything. I walked past him, into the house that once felt like a minefield and now felt like a forgotten museum. The air was stale, and the lights were dim, powered by a generator, judging by the noise out back. The fridge was off. Most of the furniture was gone. I realized, with a pang, that he'd started pawning things. Probably to keep up appearances. The attic was cold. Dust coated everything. I grabbed the boxes, but as I was heading back down, something caught my eye wedged between two beams, a plastic container covered in soot. Inside was a collection of letters. Dozens of them, all in Mom's handwriting. They weren't addressed to anyone. Just thoughts, fears, updates, as if she'd been writing to herself in secret. A form of journaling. The last one was dated just 2 months before she passed. "I'm worried about Caleb. He's already carrying too much. Every time something breaks, Stephen yells at him like he's the man of the house. But he's still just a boy. My sweet, quiet boy. I hope one day he leaves this place. I hope he builds something for himself." I sat there, holding the letter in the dark, and for the first time in years, I cried. Not because of Dad. Because of her. She saw it. She knew. And I never even got to tell her that I did exactly what she hoped I would. I left. I built a life. I stopped waiting for permission to matter. I took the box and left the attic. As I passed through the kitchen, Dad looked up from his seat and said nothing. Just watched me go. But the next morning, I got another call. This one from the bank. Apparently, Dad had attempted to take out a loan against the house. Again. Only this time, he forged my signature. That was it. That was the moment. I had been quiet. I had been fair. I had been generous, even when he didn't deserve it. But he crossed the line. And now, I was done being quiet. The forged loan application was the final straw. I met with the bank manager in person the next day, bringing the deed, my ID, and copies of the signature Dad had faked. The second the manager compared them, he sighed and leaned back in his chair. "This is bad," he said. He submitted a forged co-owner signature to secure a private loan for $30,000. That's criminal. I already knew that. I didn't need the manager to tell me how serious it was. But I also knew I didn't want to see my father behind bars. Not yet. I didn't want this to turn into another bitter headline or court drama. I just wanted the game to be over. I wanted my name, my credit, and my life out from under his thumb. The manager offered to escalate things to the legal department. I nodded and told him to proceed, but to wait on contacting authorities. I had something else in mind first. I spent the next week making quiet, strategic moves. First, I transferred full operational control of the house into a newly formed property management LLC I created under my name. Nathan agreed to sign off as co-owner, which gave me complete authority to lease, renovate, or even sell the house without needing Dad's input. That move locked Dad out of any financial maneuvering going forward. Next, I met with the same lawyer who had helped with the deed transfer and walked him through the forged loan attempt. He was livid on my behalf and promised to prepare a cease and desist order so ironclad it would make Dad regret ever holding a pen. I also called the utility companies, again, and officially declared the residence unoccupied. That triggered an inspection, which, once completed, would allow me to disconnect all services completely, permanently. But my final move was the one that truly set everything in motion. I filed a notice of eviction. Not immediately. Nathan and I agreed to give Dad 60 days to vacate, just enough to comply with the law, just enough to avoid any retaliatory nonsense. But the papers were real, signed, filed, and taped to the front door 2 days later by a process server. And that's when the silence started. Dad didn't call. He didn't text. He didn't show up at my place, or even yell at Nathan. He just disappeared inside the house. Nathan, still living with him temporarily, told me Dad barely spoke for the first week. He sat at the kitchen table most of the day, chain-smoking, muttering things to himself, flipping through old bills like they were maps to buried treasure. The power went out for good on a Thursday. Nathan sent me a photo of the dark house and one word: done. I took a deep breath and exhaled the years of buried frustration. For the first time in my adult life, I felt in control, not because I'd won something, but because I'd finally reclaimed something. Myself. In the weeks that followed, things moved quickly. Nathan stayed with me while finishing school and then moved into a small apartment using the savings I helped him set aside. He finally applied to colleges, something he'd avoided out of fear Dad would sabotage it. I co-signed for him, not because he asked, but because I trusted him. And me? I got promoted. The IT firm I worked for offered me a full-time cybersecurity role with a team under me. I started therapy, real therapy, for the first time ever. Unpacked the grief I never got to process. Mom's death, Dad's resentment, my years of silence. All of it. One evening, after work, I opened one of Mom's old journals again and found a line I hadn't noticed before. Scribbled in the margins of a page was a small note. If they don't see your worth, it doesn't mean you don't have any. It just means their eyes are broken. I closed the journal and stared at the ceiling for a long time. The eviction date was approaching. I hadn't heard from Dad since the notice. No begging, no bargaining, no threats, just silence. Until, 5 days before the deadline, I received a letter in the mail. A real, physical letter. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was from him. Inside was a folded piece of paper, creased and shaky with age. It wasn't long. Just a single paragraph written in pen. The words uneven and dark where the pen had pressed too hard. I don't know who I am without control. And I'm scared you finally saw through me. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect a response. But I'm not going to fight the eviction. I'm going to leave. I never deserved the house anyway. I know that now. No signature. No return address. Just a letter that felt hollow. Like an apology wrapped in cowardice. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't even respond. I just folded the letter and tucked it into the last of Mom's journals. And 5 days later, I drove by the house one final time. The porch was empty. The blinds were drawn. A U-Haul truck sat quietly in the driveway, already packed and ready to go. He was gone. But something in me knew. This wasn't the end. Not yet. Because what came next, the fallout, would shake more than just him. 3 days after Dad moved out, I officially stepped onto the property, not as a tenant, not as a guest, but as its legal co-owner and manager. It was like walking into a ghost of my childhood. The smell hit me first: stale cigarettes, sour food, and something underneath it all, like rot. The walls were yellowed, the living room carpet stained with who knows what. The couch was gone, probably sold for scraps. A few battered chairs sat in its place, as if still clinging to the idea of being useful. But the worst part? The silence. Not peaceful, not calm, just empty. I walked through the room slowly, taking stock of the damage. Broken cabinet doors, holes punched into the drywall, likely from one of Dad's moods. The bathroom mirror was cracked, and the toilet had been left in such a state I had to open a window just to breathe. Nathan had told me it was bad, but I hadn't expected this. It wasn't just physical neglect. It was spite. He hadn't just lived here after I left. He'd ruined it. I took pictures. Every room, every scratch, stain, and gash. I filed a claim with the property insurance company and forwarded a copy to my lawyer. But even that wasn't the real setup. No, what came next would hit deeper. Because Dad may have left the house, but he hadn't stopped spreading lies. Over the following week, I started getting calls from relatives again. Some polite, some confrontational, all confused. My cousin Stephanie asked why I'd evicted our uncle when he was just trying to keep the family together. My aunt demanded to know why Dad was sleeping in a truck. And one voicemail from Grandpa Dale actually started with, "I thought you were better than this, Caleb." That's when I realized he hadn't just played the victim. He was spinning a narrative, one where he was the noble single father, betrayed by his selfish son, where I was the overeducated, emotionally unstable snake who kicked him out of his own home out of jealousy or greed. And they believed him, because they didn't know me. They hadn't seen the quiet sacrifices, the 4 years of paying bills out of my own pocket, the nights I worked 2 jobs while Dad slept on the couch, the phone calls I made to the power company, the internet company, the water department, the dinners I skipped to make sure Nathan had lunch money. But I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to explain. I was going to show them. I began by gathering the evidence. Quietly, carefully. I printed every bill paid in my name, dating back 4 years. I compiled screenshots of payments, dates, auto drafts. I added the letter Mom wrote, the deed signed in my and Nathan's names, the cease and desist notices, the forged loan application with proof of fraud. And then I built a folder, digital and physical, titled The Truth. But I wasn't going to send it around like some petty mass email. I had something better in mind. It started with Grandpa Dale. He was hosting a family dinner for his 80th birthday, one of those big events where all the uncles and cousins show up from across the state. It was going to be catered, photographed, and shared across everyone's social media like it was the royal wedding. And Dad, of course, was going to be there, probably planning to parade around in his nicest shirt, pretending he was the tragic patriarch cast aside by his ungrateful son. So I called Grandpa directly. He was cold at first, distant. "I don't want to get in the middle of this, Caleb." "You already are," I replied. "But I'm not calling to argue. I'm calling to RSVP." That surprised him. You want to come?" "I do," I said. "And I'd like to say a few words. Just a short thank you toast for everything the family's done for me. Nothing dramatic." He hesitated. "I don't want a scene." "You won't get one," I promised. "Just the truth." He agreed. The night of the dinner, I wore my best suit. Nathan came with me. I could tell he was nervous, and frankly, so was I. Not because I doubted what I was about to do, but because I knew it would burn bridges I could never rebuild. The dinner was held at a fancy banquet hall. Crystal glasses, linen napkins. The whole extended family was there, dressed to the nines. Dad was already seated near the front, looking smug in a gray blazer I hadn't seen in years. He spotted me and Nathan and did a double take, but said nothing. The dinner began. Toasts were made. People laughed, clinked glasses, shared old stories. And then Grandpa stood up and tapped his spoon against his wine glass. "I'd like to invite my grandson Caleb to say a few words." The room quieted. I stood, walked slowly to the front, and took the mic. My hands didn't shake. "Thank you, Grandpa. And thank you to everyone here for being part of this family. I know we don't always see each other often, but I've always respected the legacy this family holds. Hard work, loyalty, and truth." I paused, scanning the room. My eyes landed on Dad. But sometimes, the truth gets lost in the stories we tell ourselves. And when that happens, people get hurt. Real stories get buried under pride and ego. I held up the folder titled The Truth. In this folder is the full history of what's been happening the last 5 years. Every bill paid, every lie told, every document proving who owned the house, who forged signatures, and who tried to rewrite the past. A murmur spread through the crowd. Dad froze. I won't read it out loud. I won't humiliate anyone. But I've made copies. And if any of you want to know the truth, not the version you heard through whispers, then come find me after dinner. I'll be standing right over there. I stepped down, returned to my seat, and for the first time in my life, felt taller than my father. He didn't say a word, but others did. One by one, after dessert, relatives approached me quietly. Some just took a folder. Others stayed to talk. A few even apologized. And as I turned to leave that night, I caught a glimpse of Dad, still seated alone at the front table, shoulders hunched, lips pressed into a thin line. His mask had cracked, but his fall, that was still coming. After the birthday dinner, everything shifted. The silence from the family ended, not with outrage, but with whispers. Some relatives distanced themselves from Dad immediately, having seen the evidence for themselves. Others stayed quiet but stopped echoing his version of the story. A few even reached out to me privately, some apologizing, others just saying they didn't know. I wasn't looking for validation, but it still felt good to be seen. I had spent so many years doing the invisible work, keeping things running, holding things together, and now, finally, the truth had shape. It had weight. It had witnesses. But Dad? He doubled down. First, he tried the guilt angle. I got a letter in the mail, another one. This time he didn't pretend to apologize. He went straight for manipulation. You've turned my own family against me. Do you feel powerful now? You're not a hero, Caleb. You're just bitter. I didn't reply. Then came the smear campaign. He posted vague rants on Facebook, tagging no one, but making it obvious. Calling people snakes, talking about how entitlement ruined his family, how some people don't understand loyalty. I didn't respond publicly. I didn't need to, but I kept receipts. Because the more he pushed, the clearer his pattern became. Accuse, deflect, play victim. Until finally, he made a mistake. He tried to sue me. I got a legal notice claiming wrongful eviction, emotional distress, and an outlandish demand for $50,000 in damages. It was laughable on the surface, poorly written, full of errors, citing laws that didn't even apply to our state. But it was filed, and that meant I had to respond. So I did, with a counterclaim, but not just to defend myself. To end this, my lawyer and I prepared a formal countersuit for property damage, attempted fraud, forgery, and slander. We included notarized statements from Nathan, bank records, utility records, and even screenshots of Dad's Facebook rants as part of the slander claim. When the court date arrived, Dad showed up in an oversized suit and a sneer. He didn't have a lawyer, just a thick folder of half-organized papers and a chip on his shoulder. But what he didn't have was a case. The judge read our documents, listened to both sides, watched as I calmly laid out a timeline, showed photos, handed over copies of receipts, statements, voice recordings, even the letter from the power company declining to transfer service due to ownership restrictions. He barely looked at Dad, just kept flipping pages, occasionally raising an eyebrow. Then he said something I'll never forget. I see a pattern of neglect, abuse of authority, and attempted fraud. I don't just find in the defendant's favor. I'm referring this case to the district attorney's office. Dad's jaw clenched. He's lying. This is a personal attack. But the gavel had already come down. Case dismissed. Counterclaim sustained. The court awarded me $12,400 in damages, just a fraction of what he cost me over the years, but that wasn't the point. The real victory? The referral for criminal investigation. That meant subpoenas. That meant scrutiny. That meant consequences. And those consequences hit fast. Within 2 weeks, Dad's attempt to secure another loan through a payday lender was flagged. His name popped up on a fraud watch list. The real estate agent he'd contacted before filed a formal complaint, citing his attempt to use forged documents. His landlord, yes, the guy who had rented him a small apartment after the eviction, called Nathan to say Dad had missed 2 rent payments and was not the person he claimed to be. The facade was collapsing, but I didn't celebrate, because revenge isn't about fireworks. It's about balance. It's about the quiet moment when you no longer flinch at your father's name. It's when you stop carrying the weight he placed on you as a child. It's when you walk into your own house, keys in hand, lights on, peace in your chest, and you realize he can't reach you anymore. Not with words, not with lies, not with guilt, not ever again. But there was still one last thing I needed to do before I could close this chapter for good. And it involved a letter. One my mother never finished, and one I was finally ready to answer. After the court ruling and the fallout that followed, life settled in a way it never had before. For the first time in years, I wasn't surviving, I was living. The house was finally quiet, but not empty. I renovated it room by room, painting over the nicotine-stained walls, replacing broken fixtures, installing new floors. Every repair felt like an act of reclaiming, not just of the property, but of myself. Nathan helped where he could on weekends. We joked, ordered pizza, put on music Mom used to love while we worked. It was healing in the purest form, messy, real, earned. The criminal referral never turned into a full trial. Dad took a plea deal for the forgery charges, avoided jail, but had to pay fines, attend mandatory financial ethics counseling, and was barred from applying for new loans for 2 years. The damage was done, though. His reputation, what little was left, was shot. The family had seen the truth. I didn't gloat. I didn't reach out. I didn't send him one of the folders titled The Truth. I didn't need to. He moved out of state soon after. Arizona, I think. Some distant cousin mentioned it during a holiday Zoom call I skipped. Apparently, he's renting a small room above a garage from a friend. No car. No stable income. Just a man left alone with his stories. The ones no one listens to anymore. As for me, I got a new job offer, bigger company, better pay, a relocation package if I ever wanted to leave Michigan. I turned it down. For now. Because here, this place, it was finally mine. One evening, I sat in the attic where I'd first found her letters. I held the last one. Mom's quiet fear that I'd be buried by the weight of a man who never knew how to lift others. I read it one final time, then flipped it over and wrote on the back. You were right, Mom. He tested me, and I walked away stronger. Thank you for seeing me. I placed the letter back in the container and sealed it with a new lid. Then I tucked it high in the rafters, where someday, maybe, someone else would find it and know the truth didn't disappear. It lived here, in these walls, in this piece. And then, just as I stood to leave, I noticed something tucked between two old beams, a scrap of paper I hadn't seen before. Wrinkled, torn, faded from time. It was Dad's handwriting. A grocery list. A stupid, simple list from years ago. Milk, bread, dog food. At the bottom, one line had been added in a scribble so faint I almost missed it. Tell Caleb I'm proud of him someday. I stared at it for a long time. Then I folded it once and let it drop into the trash bin with the rest of the broken pieces. Because someday never came. And I don't need his pride to stand tall anymore. I've got my own. And I built it from scratch.